Anna, welcome to HR, the icebreaker.
Thanks, Hugh.
Ready to rock?
Yeah.
Any questions intimidating you? Okay.
I don't get intimidated.
I'm going to find out. Okay. Question number 1 from the platinum subscribers for your icebreaker. How much morally better do you think you are compared to people who don't share your views?
I'm going to give you a double answer to this. So my first answer is I don't think it's about morals, and I don't think it's about being better. I think the stuff that we're here to talk about is about politics, and it's about political discussion and contestation. So I'm a researcher, I'm an educator. It's not about being morally better. It's about, for me, my work is about sharing the expertise that I have and engaging with different arguments and different positions from people who do or don't agree with me as part of democratic, public-facing debate. So that's the first bit of my answer. The second answer is more of a question back to your questioner, which is, I find that quite an interesting framing. That the very first question I'm asked on your podcast is whether I feel morally better. I don't know who that person is. I don't know what they know about me or what they think they know about me. But that's kind of an interesting framing that feels a little bit aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage that person to think about what they think they know about me or people like me, quote unquote, whoever that is.
Yeah, I think this is a problem with, one of the problems with tech. Like, I know who this has come from, and it's not framed like that. I say it's not framed like that. So I think it's one of the problems with reading. It's like text, isn't it? There's not much nuance in it. Yeah, no, I know where this has come from. In fact, I won't say who it is, but always challenging questions. Always submits challenging questions. Yeah, sometimes to myself. Oh, Jesus, yeah. But it's more from an inquisitive mind with challenging questions.
I'm here for that. Yeah, Hi, whoever you are.
Coke. We should refer to him as Coke.
Hi, Coke. nice to not meet you.
And he's watching live. Okay. Do you have any animosity towards any politicians or political groups?
Yes and no. So again, direct answer. I'm not massively keen on the far right. I'm not massively keen on racists, sexists, and they're organised. I'm not massively keen on them. Particular politicians, like the work that I do, I see individual politicians making decisions that they're responsible for that I think are legally questionable. David Cameron, Boris Johnson, I'm looking at you. And we've got the receipts. So, yeah, I'm not too keen on that. But more broadly, animosity. I think it's okay to have differences of opinion and to have conflict in society. We're not all going to agree. One of the things that I think is really difficult about Britain, especially right now, is that it's becoming increasingly hard to discuss those things that we disagree about. So again, that word animosity, I've got my own personal views about things in my professional capacity, and then hopefully that bleeds through into my personal life. I always try and think about like what's happening here politically, where is there ground for discussion and where is there just not ground for discussion.
Okay. What's the biggest mistake you've made in your career?
Apart from going on this podcast.
Jesus. Jesus.
When we started with Are You Morally Better? So again,
So listen, that is the order the questions came in. I did not place that question first. That is the order they came in. Anyway, go on.
So was it what's the biggest mistake? Because I've made millions of I've made loads of mistakes. I've made loads of mistakes in my teaching, in my political engagement, in engagements with colleagues. I tend not to try not to hang on to them, because as long as I can be sure that when I was doing it, I was acting in good. So I wouldn't say I've ever acted in bad faith.
That's a great answer. Yep, totally agree with that. And I've said sort of similar before.
Yeah, I've never acted in bad faith. I have made mistakes. I don't hang on to them because I did what I could with the information that I had and the maturity that I had and the emotional resources and material resources I had at the time. Would I make different decisions at a different point now? Probably. That's called growing up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Coke has responded in the chat, actually, in the live chat. Says he didn't, just to confirm, he didn't have malicious intent.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for clarifying, Coke.
Yeah. Okay. Would you stop being friends with someone if they had a political view you strongly disagreed with?
Not on principle, or on principle, no. Because I think that we are more rounded and can think expansively and broadly about things when we hear multiple points of view. In practice, I think like most people, we tend to gravitate towards people who hold similar views to us. I don't know very many people who've got friendship groups of radically mixed opinions. So I would, again, if someone who I thought I knew engaged in racist behaviours or sexist behaviours, things like that, I would, if we really were friends, I would try and raise it with them, because I also don't think that you make the world a better place by just, well, I just won't be friends with you. Like, friendships should be able to handle contestation, but it's hard. If I tried that and they doubled down, then yeah, probably I would, but I'd explain it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, part of the issue with that is varying definitions on, for example, racism and sexism, just as an example.
Absolutely.
And then, but yeah, I mean, the groups of radically mixed views. I'm in a few circles like that, but I think it's only because of the way the podcast came about and the way my network's grown doing it. But also in the military, I mean, you may or may not be surprised to hear that in the military, I mean, but it is unit dependent. The unit I was part of with people from, we were not predominantly from one geographical area of the UK.
Okay.
All over. It was a selection process to join it, so it made it different. It made the demographics different, the breakdown of the types of people you got there, from the classes they were from to areas they were from to all the rest of it. And there were some radically different views within the unit I was in, which I tend to think that's a great thing. I'm preaching to the converted you, I'm sure, but you get a group of people thinking the same way, the same way. It can create real problems, especially if they're armed.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Have you ever experienced negative treatment in your career due to being a woman?
I would say not really. And I think that's because I'm tall. I've got short hair. I grew up.
Why do you think that makes a difference?
Because I was a tomboy as a kid. I present, I'm quite confident. I think I present in ways that can be coded as masculine, as in I'll just walk into a room and be like, yeah, hi everyone. And not all men can do that, but I'm saying like social coding. I work on the arms trade, which some people are like, what's a woman? So I had every now and then I have had people like, why is a woman working on the, like, what could possibly be interesting about that for a woman? I'm like, well, it turns out quite a lot of things. So I think, I've got friends and colleagues through my education and my professional life who, by virtue of how physically what sort of woman they are, basically the smaller you are, the blonder you are, or the racially coded you are if you're a non-white woman, I think all of those people will probably have had more negative experiences at work than I have.
When you're saying racially coded, or when you're using the phrase encoding, what do you mean?
So people who are basically non-white women. But the reason I say coded is because we think we know race by the color of someone's skin, but it's actually not that simple, because someone might have a mixed heritage but pass as white, or they might have a mixed heritage but you don't know where they're from, but where they're from, they may well be British, but what their heritage is, and people make assumptions. So I think there's a difference between the color of one's skin and how race and racism work as ways of organizing us into groups.
Can we discuss that more on the podcast?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, great. Your work highlights the deeper militaristic structures underpinning the global arms trade. Can you explain how militarism shapes not just arms sales, but broader international relations? We may come on to this in the podcast, like full on if you want. But broader international relations. What alternative security frameworks could challenge this dominant logic?
Yeah. Great question. I'd love this person to be in my class.
Don't ask me to say it again.
No, it's great. So one of the reasons I find studying the arms trade interesting is because it's kind of at the pinch point at a lot of the ways in which the world is militarized. Beyond that, so I think the way that the global economy is organized is becoming increasingly militarized. So with the war in Ukraine, with Israel's war in Gaza, people are talking quite openly now about the need to increase defense spending, about the need to procure more weapons, about the need to increase the number of people in the military service, questions about is conscription coming back, and so on. I think the way that our institutions are organized is becoming increasingly militarized. Again, this question of, are we going to be, our country's going to be returning to conscription, or how are we going to get more people into the military to fight potentially against Russia, and so on. I also think the way that, so I think conflict, understood as conflict is something, it's more than just having a difference of opinion. It's where you properly disagree, but conflict isn't always violent or armed. But the tendency to try to resolve conflict internationally through coercion, through threats, through the use of force, through the use of arms, that is a militarized way to try to resolve conflict. So, for example, and so in terms of the questions of alternatives, one would be, why aren't we spending more on diplomacy? What different forms of diplomacy could be engaged? Now, if you're talking about an adversary like Putin, diplomacy might not get you to where you want to be, and so I'm not anti the idea of military action in that way. We could return, in terms of alternatives, to some of the ideas that were flying around in the peace movement during the end of the Cold War. So things like non-offensive defense. The question of, when we say defense, like who and what are we defending against what and whom? Thinking about the impact of the climate emergency and also military's contribution to the climate emergency is actually quite significant. The way that the military sector is thinking about that is, how can we use this to fight better? I'd be quite interesting, and I have a brilliant PhD student who's working on this, in thinking about how can we respond to climate emergency in ways that don't reproduce the logic that make violence possible. So I think basically you can pick any any area of collective and international life, be it political or economic, you'll see the way that militarism and military interests are threaded through it. So we know that, people always give the example of, well, the internet came out of the military, came out of DARPA. We also know that like disciplines like psychology and psychiatry and geography emerged out of military interests and the desire to make better fighting forces, or in the British case, for sort of British colonial interests. So I think war preparation is everywhere. I think it's part of our collective life, and I don't think we get very far by just wishing that away. I think there are often questions to be asked about what are we spending our money on, what else could we have tried, what else could we try now, who is being protected. I think for me that's a really big one. Who and what is being protected by military action or by X policy response.
Okay. Last one. You've worked extensively with NGOs, activists, and campaigners against the arms trade. Given the immense power of governments and defence industries, what are the most effective strategies for civil society to challenge the arms trade?
Yeah, another great question. So I think, I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear what your viewers make of this. If I think about British arms exports to Israel in particular at the moment, given everything that's happening in Palestine, I think direct action against arms companies is one of the most effective tactics that's happening at the moment, because civil society groups have done all the things that we're supposed to do in a democracy. We've had the Palestine marches, people have written to their MPs, people have signed petitions, people have drawn attention to the way that the international legal architecture is mobilising in relation to what Israel's doing. We've got the ICJ rulings, we've got the ICC arrest warrants, and yet the UK government is still selling weapons to Israel, was forced into a partial suspension of arms exports by the force of public pressure and by protest, and then carved a massive great loophole out of it by allowing components for the F-35 to still go in directly via the US. In that context, I think, the phrase that direct actionists use is direct action gets the goods. I think they're right. Like Elbit, one of Israel's largest arms companies, they've shut a bunch of their factories. We know that it's a problem for government. When democratic public debate is so skewed, I think, I'd point to direct action as one of the biggest successes at the moment.
Okay. Icebreaker done. Let's take, those are good questions. There are more questions, by the way. There's a shed load more questions that are in the chat, which we will rotate round to at the end of the full podcast.
Yep.
Because I'm guessing we're gonna cover a load of them anyway during the conversation.
Oh, okay. So if anything,
yeah, I think so. Yeah. All right. So if you are listening to the Icebreaker now on your podcast app or watching it on YouTube, this will roll straight into the next episode in your feed, which will be the full podcast without it. So and if you're a platinum subscriber watching right now in the live feed, we're going to take a 2 or 3 minute break, and we will be back.